welcome to our second interview conversation today with a consular officer. Today we want to discuss what is needed to prepare for your upcoming immigrant visa interview. The information presented in this interview will focus on both the petitioner and each beneficiary on an immigrant visa case. I'm here with Michael Murphy. Michael, welcome. Thank you for making time to talk with us again today.
Thank you so much. I'm just honored to be here and share some information to best prepare people for an interview. I understand people have waited a very long time for their interviews, and we hope that this presentation will give you the best chance of getting to the interview, having everything prepared so that we can proceed with the application.
Thank you. So let's begin with the main actions and the documents needed to prepare for an immigrant visa interview.
Okay, thank you very much. So again, I'd like to emphasize that having your documents prepared, having everything ready when you show up is the best way to go through this process. If for some reason you're not prepared and you don't have the documents that we've requested, then it'll delay, and it could delay significantly the processing of the application. Please remember, we're dealing with about 1,000 applications that still need to be interviewed and reviewed. And so if you cause any delay, then it goes into that queue of 1,000. And so people wait for a very long time.
Which application does each applicant need to prepare for the immigrant visa?
So for most applications, it's what's called the DS-260. Each applicant must have a separate DS-260. For fiancé visas, it's called the DS-160. And there are circumstances where you have what's called a derivative, where you have an applicant and their children can be in the same interview, but they all have to have their own application, including babies, including brand new children.
Okay, so if the beneficiary is under 18, does that person need to come with an adult?
They do. A very good question, Gladys. So if you have a minor under the age of 18, they must come with an adult. If the applicant is under 14, then they're not able to sign their own oath, and they need to have an adult guardian with a valid ID, such as a passport, a driver's license, or a national ID that has their birthday on it. If you show up with like a voter registration card does not have a birthday on it, then we cannot accept that as the ID for the adult who's signing for the minor child under 14.
So thank you, Michael, for sharing all this wonderful and very helpful information today. Are there fees associated with an immigrant visa application?
There sure are. In most cases, the fees will be paid by the petitioner in the United States, but there will be some circumstances in which such as a fiancé visa, where you can actually pay here in Liberia. We ask you to pay at what's called GT Bank and make that payment. But again, most times, the vast majority of circumstances, the fees are paid in the United States by the petitioner to the National Visa Center.
So GT Bank is the Guarantee Trust Bank. If you do not know, please do not give any money for immigrant visa process to any individual. If there is a need to pay, as Michael said, use GT Bank, and there is an account there.
Thank you, Gladys. That's a very important point. The only people that you should be giving money to, if you have to pay here in Liberia, is GT Bank.
So, what are the several documents the beneficiary needs to bring to their immigrant visa interview?
That's another great question. So we ask that everybody bring the original birth certificate. If you have a marriage certificate and a marriage license, you bring the original of those documents, depending on the case that you're dealing. If you're a child, of course, you would need to bring your connection to the parent, so that's your birth certificate. There's no need to get a new birth certificate if you already have an old one. For some reason, a lot of people think you have to get a new birth certificate when they come to their interview, and that's not the case. Bring the oldest birth certificate that you have. Marriage certificates, like I said, if you also bring the LRA receipt, the Liberian Revenue Authority receipt, with you when you bring those documents. If you are a parent of the petitioner or a sibling of a petitioner, The petitioner birth certificate is also required. We need to see the original, which again establishes the relationship between the petitioner and the beneficiary.
Are there any other civil documents that they may need to bring?
Yes, we also require a police clearance for any country that you've lived in over the age of 16 for more than 6 months. So, for example, you lived in Ghana for 7 months, you would have to have a Ghanaian police clearance. And we have information that we'll provide in this presentation, which shows you how to get those clearances. If you are a student in China, if you traveled to Switzerland, if you've been to any country more than 6 months, to include time that you're a refugee, and we understand the history of Liberia, some people were forced to live outside Liberia. You have to have a police clearance if you live there for more than 6 months after the age of 16.
Are there any medical requirements in the immigrant visa process?
There sure are. So every applicant has to have a medical clearance. There are two, what we call panel physicians here in Liberia. One is called MedLink, and the other one is called Wellness. And you'll get instructions from the National Visa Center on which of the panel physicians you have to go to. The clearance is only good for 6 months, generally. That means that when you have your interview date set, go to one of the panel physicians, have your medical clearance done, and it'll be good for 6 months. Again, this gets into if you show up unprepared and you're delayed, it's possible that your medical clearance will expire and you'll have to pay to have another medical clearance. And we want to avoid any extra cost. So please, when you show up for your interview, be ready.
So let's talk about finances. Is each immigrant visa beneficiary required to have a sponsor in the United States?
They are. Very good question. Yes. So part of U.S. law requires that each immigrant to the United States have what's called an affidavit of support. That means somebody in the States is like assuming financial responsibility for that immigrant. And you must, the sponsor must fill out what's called the I-864. There's an I-864W, which is like a waiver for children. And then there's an I-864A, which is a household member. But generally, what it is that you have to, the sponsor has to make a certain amount of money. And that money is set by the Department of Health and Human Services. And you have to make more than that amount to be able to sponsor the number of people in your family. So for instance, if you are a sponsor in the States and you're sponsoring one person, then there's an amount. But let's say you're a sponsor and you already have 3 children, then that amount goes up. And you have to exceed that amount. And it has to be 150% of what Health and Human Services states is the poverty level of the United States. It's a very specific amount, and we do check for everyone. But every sponsor has to have, each applicant has to have their own financial sponsor.
Thank you, Michael. So how long does my passport need to be valid for at the time of my immigrant visa interview?
So your passport has to be valid for 6 months at the time of your interview. And again, this is one of those situations. If your passport is good for, let's say, 7 months at your interview, okay, technically you're okay. But if you show up and you're not prepared for your interview and there's a delay, your passport could expire and you'll have to get another passport before your visa is issued.
So Michael, before we get back to asking other questions, if the petitioner has naturalized or he or she has become a U.S. citizen after the visa petition has been filed, would there be any changes in the visa application?
There sure are. Got a great question, and it's a little complicated. But if there are certain classes of visa where the petitioner could have a green card or be a legal permanent resident and petition for other family members, if during the process the petitioner then becomes an American citizen, the petition changes to what's called immediate relative. And so, for instance, you're petitioning for a child as a green card holder, and then you become an American citizen, then the child then becomes what's called an IR2, which is child of an American citizen. At that point, the the visa class changes and they can no longer have derivatives. So if the child has children of their own, once the petitioner becomes an American citizen, then those derivative children will require their own petition and their own application.
Thank you, Michael, for making time again today to talk with us, and thank you all for watching. Before we leave, Michael, do you have anything else to add?
I do. And so being prepared is the most important part. I know some of you have waited a very long time, but if you come and you're not prepared and the officer asks you to provide additional documentation, one of the requirements after 2019 is that all documents are scanned into your case. We have electronic cases. So for instance, you forgot to bring your birth certificate. We'll ask you to provide the original birth certificate. But before you bring it back to the embassy, and we have procedures for that, we want you to upload it into the system. It's called SEAC, which is the application process. Your petitioner would have uploaded all the other documents into it, so it's the same process. It's important that you upload those documents, or you have the petitioner upload those documents before you bring the originals back to us. Because if you bring the originals and you haven't uploaded them, then they're not actually considered part of the case, and it'll delay the adjudication of your case even further. And we know everybody does not want that to happen.
Thank you so much for joining us. Please remember to follow our U.S. Embassy website at lr.usembassy.gov. Follow us on Facebook, U.S. Embassy Monrovia, Liberia. And please join us for our next session, which will come out soon, so we hear the right information from the right sources at the U.S. Embassy. Thank you.